military, and you were first exposed or received more or less official word, if you will, of
the reality?
Of the reality, sure.
Are we rolling?
We are rolling.
Okay. In 1963, I had applied for and received a choice assignment. I was at Fort Huachuca in Arizona at the time, and I applied for an assignment to a headquarters in Shape, Paris, a NATO headquarters, and I applied and was accepted. I had a top secret clearance at the time, which you had to have to go to Shape headquarters. Shape is Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe. I applied and was accepted, and I took my family, and in the summer of 1963 we went off to Paris, which is where Shape was located at that time. Now, I was there for almost 5 years, and I helped move the headquarters from Paris up to Brussels, where it's located today. But I arrived in the summer of 63 with a top secret clearance. I was given an assignment to a place called SHOC, Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. It literally was the war room. And my top secret clearance was upgraded at that time to a level called cosmic top secret, which was then and still is today the highest level of security classification in NATO. So I was working in the war room. I was given an assignment, Operations Division, working in SHOC with a cosmic top secret clearance. And when I arrived in the summer of 63, I learned of a study that was underway. Now, guys in headquarters like that, international headquarters, we had French, British, Germans, Americans, Turks, Greeks, all of NATO. Although I must be honest and tell you that Shape headquarters was run primarily by the Americans, the British, and the Germans, and it still is today. The other nations were involved, but they never contributed very much. They didn't have too many men to assign. But when I arrived in the summer of 63, I learned of a study that was underway, which was curious, interesting. It seems that in 1961, the Warsaw Pact and the Allies, Shape NATO, the Western powers, almost went to war in 61, in February of 61. And the reason was that there were large numbers of circular metallic objects flying in formation all over Europe. In those days, they would generally fly out of the east from the Warsaw Pact areas to the west, over France, Germany, and then they would turn over the southern coast of England, over the Channel. They'd go north, and then they would disappear off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea. And these objects were in formation, very obviously under intelligent control. And for a time, the Allies thought they were Soviets. And for a time, we learned that the Soviets thought they belonged to us. And here we are, Europe was divided, armed to the teeth. World War III was just moments away. And this flyover in February of 61 almost triggered a shooting war between the Soviets, the Warsaw Pact, and Shape NATO. Well, a British air marshal, who was Deputy Supreme Allied Commander at the time, decided that he'd had about enough. His name was Sir Thomas Pike. And Air Marshal Pike decided that this has happened a dozen times. We've got to find out what the hell these objects are. Are they Soviets? The Soviets thought they belonged to us for a while. So they initiated a study in February of 61, which was underway when I got there in the summer of 63. And the study was taking place, and there was a lot of gossip, people at headquarters. Psst, 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 psst. Well, they finished the study in the summer of 64 and published it. And I'm still working in the war room with my cosmic top secret clearance. And in the summer of '64, they published this study. They titled it An Assessment. Subtitle, An Evaluation of a Possible Military Threat to Allied Forces in Europe. You know, you look at the cover of it and it didn't say very much. Cosmic top secret. But you turned the pages and you got inside the damn thing. Well, working in the war room, I had access to the vault with my cosmic clearance. I'm working one night, in the middle of the night. We were on long shifts. And sometimes I was on a night shift and I was in, 2 and 3 in the morning. The coffee was too black to drink. All the newspapers, you'd read them, the magazines, you'd read all of that. And you're bored to death. You just, as they say in the military, 90% of it is boredom. And 10% is sheer terror, And so in this one morning, I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs and nodding off, and this American Air Force colonel had been in the vault, and he picked up this document, and he threw it on my desk, and he says, "Here, Master Sergeant, read this. This will wake you up." And I turned the pages, started getting into the damn thing, and I didn't realize that my life was beginning to change. Because the study was about them. Are they a threat? Is there a military threat involved? It was a thorough 3-year study. Had a document that was about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter thick. But it was supported by about 10 inches of appendices and annexes. And that's where the real nitty-gritty was, in those appendices and annexes. And they'd done historical evaluation, they had done psychological studies, sociological studies, theological implications. It was a pretty thorough piece of work for a military study, which had one focus, and that is there a threat or is there not? Well, the conclusion of the study, when they published it in '64, they only published 15 copies. One copy went to my boss, Lyman Lemnitzer, American 4-star general, who was Supreme Allied Commander in Europe at the time. And the Brits got a copy, the Germans got a copy, the Italians and the French, and so on. But when I got into that thing and started going through it and looked at the photographs and looked at the details, I couldn't leave it alone. Because it literally concluded that we on planet Earth, the human race, had an intimate interrelationship with advanced non-human intelligence for centuries, if not millennium. The historical annex was quite thorough. There were reports that the Romans and the Greeks had written of seeing these shields in the sky, these circular discs, these metallic objects, in formation all over the place. And the conclusions reached after the study was published was that apparently these guys have been coming and going here from the beginning of our history. And that no, there was not apparently a threat involved, because if there had been, the repeated demonstrations of their incredibly advanced technology indicated that if they were malevolent or hostile, the game would have been over a long, long time ago. As one of the Air Force generals said, hell, they could have cleaned our clock at any time. It's a little figure of speech that a lot of the military guys like to use. Well, they didn't clean our clock, and they haven't cleaned our clock since. So they apparently were not malevolent or hostile. But the study in '64 did not determine who they really were and why were they really here, and why were they interested and involved with us. It didn't touch upon that. It simply was focused on, is there a threat The conclusion was there apparently is not, and that was it. But I couldn't leave it alone. There was a crash of a disk in northern Germany in '63, I believe, about the year I got there, in a place called Timmensdorfer Strand on the Baltic in the north. And this, I think it was 30 meters disk, good size, almost 100 feet. Well, actually 100 feet. And this disk had went in, and a British engineer battalion had retrieved it, got inside of it, figured out how to take it apart, because it crashed in the British zone. In those days, Germany was divided up into zones. The Brits had the northern sector, we had the central, and the French had the southern. This disk crashed at Timmensdorfer Strand, and the British Engineer Battalion got into it, and they found 12 little bodies. And there was an annex that included autopsies and photographs, and autopsy analysis of these little guys, which are about 3.5, 4 feet tall. And I remember being intrigued by that autopsy study because the medical examiners that conducted the autopsies on these guys were overwhelmed at what they had encountered. These little dudes were all almost identical. I mean, they were just copies of each other practically. When they got inside their little bodies, they determined that they were biological androids, apparently, that they didn't have a circulatory system quite like ours. There was a little heart kind of thing, and there was a fluid in the body, which they were really intrigued by. But there was no alimentary tract, and there was no reproductive capability. And they were all practically identical. So the crash at Timmensdorfer really blew the medical examiners away. Because what in the hell are we dealing with here? They're all identical. They do not apparently have a reproductive capability. They have no alimentary tract. They had a little mouth, and they didn't have teeth. Inside they had tissues. So they obviously ingested something in the way of nutrients, but they couldn't chew and they couldn't process as we do. Well, it blew them away, which is why even today you have the lid still being kept on top of this, and it's going to be kept tightly held. This lid is going to be on top on this subject for years yet to come. Because these little dudes, these little guys, reproductive types, I mean, they were obviously biological. I mean, they were living creatures, but they were, biological androids, and they apparently had run them off of an assembly line somewhere because they were all absolutely identical. They couldn't reproduce themselves. And that really blew them away. And that was one of the things that intrigued me the most, of reading the medical examiner's outstanding remarks and observations about what in the name of God are we confronted with here. Well, I was to learn later, as most of us were to learn over the years, that these little dudes were just a tiny part of the program. Later, we were to discover that there were at least 4 different groups involved, and that's what the study concluded, that there were 4 different groups because there had been landings, face-to-face confrontations, they ran into entities that were not human, but they were humanoid. They had arms and legs. They stood up on 2 legs. Many of them were 5 feet, 6 feet. Some were even 8 feet. And that really blew him away. But these guys used to land over there in Europe in those days, and they still do. Not just in Europe, but all around the world. We had a couple of cases that were in the study where they landed outside of a little town in Belgium. And there was an old farmer and his wife having dinner one afternoon, and they heard a commotion in the stockyard outside. And the old man with a napkin in his chin here probably had a spoon and fork in his hand, and he goes to the door. And a disc had come in and landed in his back pasture. And the old boy was kind of shocked by it. So he goes out, and a door opens in the disc. A little ramp comes down, and two guys, looked perfectly human, came down the ramp, spoke to him in his patois Belgian language, and this was in the French-speaking part of Belgium, and asked him to come aboard. Let us show you our ship. Well, the old man pulled his napkin off and laid his knife and fork down, and away he went, and he got on board. And the missus gets to the door and sees her husband going up the ramp into this disc and has a fit. And the ramp goes up, the door closes, the thing takes off, and her husband is gone. Well, the madam just has a fit, and she gets, I think they had a phone at the time in the house, and she calls the local police, who called the local military, and the next thing you know, there's about 15 or 20 guys there. There's a whole crowd trying to figure out what the hell had happened to the old farmer. Well, while they're there, this disc comes in, lands in the pasture, the door opens, the ramp comes down, and the old farmer gets out and says, wait till I tell you what I've seen. Man, listen, this is incredible. And he's jabbering away. And of course, the wife is having a fit. And the police and the military are there. And they'd seen the entire thing take place. They whisked the old boy and his wife away to Brussels and kept them for a week. Well, this was only one incident, and this was an orchestrated event, because this is what they did. They did it again in northern Italy. They landed one time 2 days before Christmas. I'm trying to remember the year, but there's an Italian Air Force sergeant on duty, and it's an Italian Air Force base. This disc comes in, lands on the runway, the door opens, the ramp comes down, and two guys get out, human-looking, speaking perfect Italian, and invited this Air Force sergeant to come aboard. The poor kid just lost it. He peed in his pants. He just lost it. He stood there stunned. He couldn't move. And the guys, who invited him aboard got back, and, the ramp goes up, the door closes, and it's gone. But they did this time and time and time again, which was part of their plan, to soften and instruct us, to inculcate, I think is the right word, that they were not a threat, but they were real. And they had been doing this time and time again. Hell, they came over in Ramstein Air Force Base one time. Big disc came in, hovered over the runway, just a few feet off the runway. Everybody went apeshit, excuse my term, but you can imagine. This is an Air Force base, Ramstein, jet fighters and all that. The guys on the runway said, "My God, look at it! Look at it! It's hovering there. It's just sitting there, a few feet above the runway." And the guys in the tower are painting it on the radar. Okay. Next thing you know, the guys in the tower says it's gone. The guys on the ramp says, "No, it's not. It's still here." But it had disappeared off radar. The next thing you know, the guys on the ramp says, "Well, it's gone now. It just disappeared." And the guys in the tower says, "No, it's not. We're still painting it on the scope. So it's still sitting there. But you can't see it." Well, that was done intentionally, you see. And they did that time and time and time again. They flew circles around our jet fighters, made fools of the guys. Gordon Cooper told me before he died, and I had a chance to meet him. He was a delightful guy. The astronaut. Gordon says, hell, they were flying all over the damn place when I flew jets in Europe in the 50s. So they were trying slowly, gently, carefully to get us used to their presence without scaring us half to death, without threatening us necessarily. But it was amusing at the way they played games with us. They made fools out of us, flew circles around us and disappeared in front of us and then appeared again right there. And then they took people for rides. Hell, I found out later that they had been doing the same things in the United States. They took people for rides. Hey, come aboard. Anyhow, I was at shape from 63 to 67. And old man de Gaulle got his anger up, got angry and pissed off at us because he had felt he had not been treated properly by the Allies during the war and after the war. So he withdrew from the military alliance in 1967. France stayed a member of NATO, but de Gaulle purposely withdrew from the military alliance, so we had to close our headquarters outside of Paris in 67 and move the entire damn thing up where it's located today, a few miles outside of Brussels. And that was one of my last assignments in 67, is to help move the headquarters from Paris, a little place called Roquencourt, right outside of Paris. And we moved the headquarters up to Brussels, and that was my last assignment. Then I came home. But that was my introduction to the reality of the extraterrestrial presence. Walter, I'll be honest with you, I use the term extraterrestrial isn't really applicable. Alien is not an applicable term. I hate the term UFOs because they're not unidentified. We've learned that these intelligences, and there are many of them, we have a personal relationship with two today, our government. But we've learned that they're not only interplanetary, that some are interstellar, some are intergalactic. Now that really blows their mind because, most of our physicists, the astrophysicists, say you can't get here from there, you can't get here from there and get there from here. Nonsense. These guys don't know those limits. We're dealing not only with interplanetary, interstellar, and intergalactic, we're dealing with multidimensions. And when that began to dawn on them, and that was dawning on them before I retired in 76, I still had a top secret clearance when I left the military in October of 76. When they learned that some of them were coming and going from other dimensions, that really sent them back to their drawing boards, as it were. So the reality of it, Walter, is so far beyond what the average guy has any idea. We're dealing with intelligences that some of them are maybe 1 million years ahead of us. And that could be a modest judgment. My God, we're talking about intelligences could be 10 million years ahead of us, technologically, spiritually. And over the years, I've learned that the spiritual component is probably 95 to 99% of it. It's not just the physical reality of their coming and going. It's not just the physical reality of their relationship with us and their involvement with our development, our evolution, our genome. It's spiritual because it has to do with the fact that human beings living in these containers that we call human bodies are literally infinite and immortal beings. And that is the best part of it. That's the part that excites me. That's the part that blows my mind, and that's the part that I want to know all the answers to. You see, I have been a believer in reincarnation since I was quite young. I went through a period of post-traumatic, hypnotic past life regression some years ago. And boy, what an opening that was. When I realized for the first time that I not only had one or two previous lives, I had a couple of dozen. And the reality of that and what the implications were. Why do we reincarnate? Why do we come here for a short time? I've been here for a very brief moment. Hell, I'm 82. I'll be 83 in another month. But that's only a moment, a tiny little moment in time. I lived before I came. I will live after I leave. And I'm an immortal being with a spark of divinity in me, as are you and every other human being on this planet. That's why I keep speaking out openly and publicly, Walter. That's the issue that's got to be brought to people's mind, that there is no death, that you are an infinite, immortal being with a spark of divinity within you. And I think that's part of what their educational process is all about. They're trying to get the human race to grow up. And you see, you start me on this subject, and it's difficult to shut me up.
Yeah, I'm an intent listener, and I love to hear the stories. The stories are what define us. And there are things that you're telling me that I have, in my own way, come to realize.
You've learned yourself, yeah.
Yes. So, if we can, I go back to the Brookings Institute and their report and the chaos they
1961.
Say that'll happen if, the reality of all this should come out. And you have all the powers that be that are trying to control the masses, or whatever you want to call it, for whatever reason. I just think, who are they to really kind of hold the truth back? If that is indeed the truth.
Who are these arrogant bastards who determine for themselves what we can learn and what we can know and what we should not know?
Right.
Yeah. The Brookings report was literally a major factor. You knew it became literally national policy in '61 when it was published. That they determined that if we were to encounter, at some point, an advanced intelligence out there, should we let the common folk know? Should we tell the people? And the conclusion of the Brookings Institute was no. Sociological, psychological, theological implications were so overwhelming that you can't tell them the truth. They're not ready for it. Well, over the years, I've gotten to a point where sometimes I agree with the Brookings study, and other times I say to hell with it. You've got to bring it out. You've got to get people ready. You've got to prepare them for this. And then I found out that there was indeed, Walter, a form of disclosure taking place. And it's known as subliminal education. And it's been underway for over 30 years, maybe longer, with movies, magazines, books, articles, people speaking publicly like me, big mouths like me, violating my national security oath. And I went through some pretty rough times because of that.
Are you being followed? Have you been threatened?
Oh, I've been threatened. I've been intimidated. Yeah. Used to be years ago when I was living in Tucson. I worked for the Sheriff's Department. I was working under the FEMA program. SUVs used to follow me at night, dark SUVs with darkened windows. I could tell. I look in the mirror. I know when I'm being followed. I used to get calls in the middle of the night, 2 and 3 in the morning, with a gruff voice saying, "Hey, you big mouth, keep your damn mouth shut or else. You're saying too much. We know where you live. We know who you are." I went through a lot of intimidation. But I got to a point after a while when I had seen lives and careers and families ruined because men, Air Force pilots or other, made a mistake and said something they shouldn't have said, and their career was ruined. And I got to a point where I said, to hell with it, I don't care anymore. And I decided in 1991 to come out of the closet, as it were, and say what I've seen, what I've learned, and what I've concluded. And I had a good friend, a retired Air Force colonel in Tucson by the name of Wendell Stevens. And Wendell and I put together in 1991 the world's first UFO conference in Tucson. And I came out of the closet in a big way and started babbling away, and I haven't stopped since. I've got to talk because I can't keep this stuff inside of me. It's so important, Walter, as you probably have already concluded. This is the most important issue in human history. It literally deals with who we are, what we are, why we're here, and what this is all about. And it also dispenses with the fear of death. And I think people need to know that they are infinite and immortal beings, and they have a spark of divinity within them. Scientist, specialist. In 1993, he retired from Northrop Grumman. And he told Wendell and I at a conference in 93 that we had put on in Phoenix, right here in town. And he says, you know, we've had hyperluminal flight for 30 years. Now, this is 93. And Wendell and I said, wait a minute. Hyperluminal flight? And he said, yeah. Faster than light. We've had it for over 30 years, and this is in 93. And then when Ben Rich retired in 95, and I quote him when I make my presentations, Ben Rich said, and he was what, Lockheed Martin?
Right.
He said, you know, we can take E.T. home. And there was a little bit of humor there, because I think the movie E.T. was playing at about the time.
Right.
He says, we can take E.T. home. And everybody says, Ben, what are you talking about? He says, if you've seen it on Star Trek, we've got it. We've got technology over here in the desert that you wouldn't believe. And all these little bits and pieces come together. And then you find out that we've had anti-gravity for over 30 years. And everybody gets so hoop-de-doo and upset and excited about Site 51 and the big long runways and the Aurora and the SR-71 and all that gobbledygook. And when you realize that that is all just for the public, that the reality of it is we have anti-gravity, we have hyperluminal flight, and we have been to the stars. Now, big jabberies, characters like me, who doesn't know enough to keep his mouth shut, who shares with people what he's seen, what he's learned, what he's concluded, and he quotes people. I don't just do this off my cuff, you know. I've got facts that support my comments and statements. We literally have a space program that makes NASA look like a bunch of idiots. Which is why NASA says we're probably not going back to the moon. We can't afford it. Bullshit. You know, we probably won't be able to go to Mars for another 20 years. Bullshit. We've been back to the moon. We have a small contingent on the moon, even today. And we've been to Mars, and we have a small contingent on Mars.
Well, Bob, let me ask you, what do you think the purposes of that is, to have that small contingent on Mars and the moon?
Well, we were invited. That's the only reason we're there. Now, when we first went through the Apollo program, we were flat told at the end of Apollo 17, get off and stay off. Because you want to militarize all of this crap. You want to bring military, you want weapons, you want nuclear weapons here and there. They flat told us in those days to get the hell out and stay out, you know. You're not coming until you get your act together and stop trying to militarize the moon and Mars because there are Martians on Mars. There are survivors of an ancient Martian civilization on Mars, and they're living in a city which the Soviets photographed, the size of Chicago, underground. And I show those photographs in my presentations. Robert, the big thing is control, power and control. If the truth were to come out in the new reality of our new technology that we have, what we have accomplished, it'd blow the hell out of the oil industry. And if that were to happen, the world economy would collapse, you see. So that information has got to be dribbled out in little tiny bits and pieces. The fact that if we were to admit to the world that we have anti-gravity technology and we have hyperluminal flight, we can go to the stars and we've been there, all the rest of this gobbledygook becomes meaningless, you see. And all these guys that get up in front of the cameras and talk about explaining the universe, and they talk about all the distances and the time, and they don't even grasp for a moment what the hell they're talking about, that the pictures they're taking from stars and galaxies out there, the light from them began 100,000 years ago, maybe, or more. And we're now just getting that light. Is it any wonder I get exasperated? You know, one of my great heroes was Charles Fort. I quote him when I make some of my presentations. Charles Fort said before he died, he says, "I think we're property." He says, "I think we're owned by someone or something." And I liked that because not only did Charles Fort say it, but William Bramley says it, and a whole bunch of other people have said it. And I've tried to put a little twist to it, that I don't think we're property in quite that sense. And the conclusion that I've reached, and you can put this and quote me, Walter, if you will, is that we are under a trusteeship. We are an unfinished product. We are a work in progress, the human race. We're not complete yet, and we're under a trusteeship. And the trustees are at least 3, 4, maybe a half a dozen different advanced intelligences from out there. And when I say out there, I don't mean just other planets and stars and galaxies. I mean other dimensions as well. Some of the more advanced intelligences that are coming here regularly are popping in from other dimensions. And you try to explain that to a physicist? I was amused the other day when I was watching a program on the tube. I don't watch that much TV anymore. Most of it bores me half to death. But they had a little something about some of the progress that's been made, some of the new discoveries they've made. And I think that maybe a few of them are beginning to get a nagging feeling about what's really going on. But they won't admit it. But you can tell. People like Michio Kaku, and I know you know who Michio is. He's a bright young guy. He's beginning to come around. I saw him up on front of the screen one time, and he's at a blackboard, and he's working away with his equations, and he reaches out, and he says, the conclusion I reach is infinity, and he says it doesn't make any sense. You may have seen the same program.
No, but the sentiment makes sense.
He says it doesn't make any sense. What we see out there does not register in making any sense. I'm amused, and I think it's really funny when you get a traditional physicist who's talking about Einstein, E equals mc squared, blah, blah, blah. And then he has to address quantum physics, where this particle here has the same intelligence as this particle here, and there's no limit apparently. And apparently intelligence and thought is instantaneous. Now, I think Einstein, before he died, says, I don't even want to go there. So there were reports that when he was confronted with quantum physics, he said, no, I don't want to address that.
I want to bring it back to some of your experiences.
Okay.
I'm curious about, see, you had mentioned actually meeting them.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing with us how that came about and what the experience was like?
Well, I have to go back when I was 2.5 years old when they saved my life. I shared this with Carrie one time. When I was just a little tyke, I used to love to go near the water. And then my mother and dad were living in a little place called Covington, Kentucky back then, because Pop worked for the railroad. And down at the end of the block was an enormous industrial canal that had been dredged. It carried ore barges up to the foundry, and it had carried slag back, and so on and so on. This was an industrial canal that had been dredged, and it was steep and about 40 feet down, and barges used to go back and forth. I used to go down there when my mother wasn't aware, and I'd throw little pieces of wood into the water, and then I would throw pebbles at the little pieces of wood. I loved water. I just liked being near it, and that nearest water at that time, beside the Ohio River over here, was that damn canal. And my mother knew I would go over there, and she used to threaten me with an inch of my life. And I went out there one time when she wasn't paying attention, and I toddled down to the canal, and I was throwing little stuff into the water. And I got too close to the edge, and I tumbled in. Steep sides, about 40 feet down. And I'm thrashing around in this canal, trying to grab a hold of the sides of this thing, and the dirt's turning to mud, and I'm splashing, and my little play suit is getting soaking wet, and I thought to myself at the time, Walter, this has been a short trip. My small child's mind reached that level. Hey, I'm going to check out of here. I'm drowning. This has been a short trip. And about that time, a powerful pair of hands grasped me from the rear, under my arms, and lifted me up 40 feet out of that canal and placed me on top. And I look around, and of course there's nobody there. I'm soaking wet, covered with mud. There's nobody there. What the hell happened here? And then I was overwhelmed with fear because I knew I was in deep doo-doo with my mother. And I toddled off home, and yes, I got my little ass beat royally. She's crying and whacking me with a ruler and a yardstick at the same time and sobbing because she knew where I'd been. And the idea of what had happened with this powerful pair of hands that had grasped me under and lifted me out, it kind of went into my subconscious, and I never thought about it for a while, until many, many years later. That's when my relationship began with them. And trying to put terms to that and explaining that, who was it there at that time and why did they save me? And I only later, many, many years later, put the pieces together. Did it make sense that I had come for a purpose, that there was a meaning to my incarnation, that I was on the planet for a reason of some kind. And then it all began to make sense. And as I told you earlier, we were chatting together about, it's only been about the last 20, 25 years, Walter, that I've really begun to make sense out of it. And then I went through that process, as I jokingly said, where I thought I was losing my mind. Then I became convinced I had lost it. And now I'm in stage 3 where I'm sane and the rest of the world is nuts. And you can put that on the screen and tell people, because that's where I'm at, phase 3.
Sounds like you're your major claim here, the story, life goes on and everybody else is nuts, right?
Well, it's not really being fair to the masses of people out
Sure.
there. But they are asleep. They're all dozing. They're not waking up. And they've got to wake up. Because the reality they're going to be forced to confront is going to shatter their worldview to such a degree that you have experienced and I have experienced and thousands, if not millions of others have experienced it. And you've got to prepare yourself for this. This world is not what we think. We incarnate here to go to school. And it's a damn tough school, planet Earth. But it's a beautiful little zoological garden. I was told by one of them one time, and I show this in my presentations. I have a picture of the planet. And I said, I have been told by a couple of these guys that this planet is considered to be probably the richest and ripest zoological garden in this galaxy. That the flora and fauna on this planet is almost infinite. And they venerate this planet, and they venerate this garden, and they venerate all the fauna on it. And I look around and I say, hey, you're fauna. You're fauna. This guy may be partly flora over here, but that's another story there. I won't even do that. But, you're part of this garden, and they venerate this garden, which is why this garden is going to continue. They've got too much invested in this. Hell, they've been terraforming it and putting life on this planet for over 1 million years, and that is probably a modest statement.
When you said they told you, how do you get the communication?
Walter, I have been taken aboard their ships several times. I've been taken primarily for medical examinations, that what I can piece together. One time I was standing in this room with about 15 or 20 other people, and we were all stark-ass naked. And this very tall, thin, alien, I don't know what to wish to call him, one of the others, comes over and directs me to this table and asks me to get up on the table. And I put my little bare buns up on the table, and it was cold. It was metal. And I complained about it. And I laid down, and, my back is on this cold metal, and I'm expressing my view, and as I will want to do. I've never been hesitant about that, opening my big yap, and I say, hey, this is uncomfortable. This is cold, damn it. And I laid back down, and I went through the process. And the process, as I remember it clearly for the first time, it's happened several times. This one big tall guy is running his hand over my body, and I could feel the warmth of his hand. He never touched me, but I could feel the warmth of his hand from my toes up to my head. And I gathered, and I sensed that he was examining me and maybe healing me to some degree. But I had made my point about the fact that that damn table was cold and I didn't enjoy it very much. And the next time I was aboard the ship and went through the same process, he brought me over there and asked me to get up on it. And I put my little bare buns up on it, and it was covered with what appeared to be a thick golden plastic filled with warm water. And I laid back down and I wiggled my buns and my shoulders, and I'm laying back, and I says, well, now this is more like it. This is all right. And this big dude, this tall fellow, he must have been 7 feet, got kind of a half grin on his face and said, we thought you would appreciate it. Now, Walter, I don't know to this day whether they made me think I was sitting on warm plastic or whether I was on that steel table again, because they have the ability to make you think whatever they want you to think. So it could have been the steel table again, and I just thought it was a warm plastic, but at least I thought it felt good. And he said, we thought you would appreciate that. And that's when it dawned on me they had a sense of humor. Well, I've had several trips on board their ships. One time, there's a retired dentist here, lives outside of Phoenix now, Robert Cave and his wife. And I'm attending a dinner at a restaurant in Sedona. And I'd never met Bob and his wife before. They were already having dinner in this restaurant. And my wife and I walked in, and she remarks, "Oh my God, it's him." Loudly. "Oh my God, it's him, Robert." Bob Cave. And I look over and who is this woman? I never met her before in my life. And Dr. Cave, he's a dentist at the time, came over and he says, "Let me explain, please." He says, "We have been abducted several times on board alien craft." And he says, "We were aboard one time going through a process of examination and checks and whatever. And he says, we both look over and there is you standing off on the side talking to about 3 of these big tall dudes, and you're wearing a long white robe." And he says, "Don't you remember?" And I says, "No, I haven't a clue." Now that time I didn't remember being there, talking to them, or wearing the white bathrobe. I thought of it later, and I thought it's kind of like the bathrobes you get in certain luxury hotels, you know, where the bathrobe is there, and if you take it and use it and take it with you, you pay for it, but, you know. But I was wearing a long white bathrobe of some kind and talking to 2 of these big dudes, and I haven't a clue of remembering that event. But Bob Cave and his wife remembered it vividly. That's why she was exclaiming, "It's him, it's him." So I've been aboard many times. And then they used to take me out, Walter, and this was in Tucson, years and years ago, in the middle of the night. They took me out one time, and I'm taken physically. I not mean just spiritually, but I was taken physically, my body. And they had me in the back of a car, and there were 2 of these big tall dudes on each side of me and a couple in the front seat. And we went outside of town, and it's a few miles, and it appears to be, from what I can remember, that there was an abandoned old farmhouse just off the road. And they pulled in there, got me out of the car and took me in. And inside this practically vacant, empty old farmhouse was a desk, and sitting behind this desk was this individual. And they pushed me forward in front of him. And he looked up at me and he kind of smiled and he says, "Don't you know me, Robert? Don't you know me?" And I said to him, "It seems that I do. Your face is kind of familiar, but I can't place it." And he says, "Robert, you and I have been working together for many, many years." And I went through an hour or so of conversations, most of which I do not remember, because they have a way of doing that, you know. They can close your memory off completely. So then later on, I had experiences where they would come up to me after conferences and introduce themselves. And that's when I began to tell audiences, I said, I've never been at a conference in all of 20 years where there at least isn't 1 or 2 or more of them in the audience. And I says, they're all around you. You run into them, you've met them, but you don't know. Now, these are people who look just like us. Now, Walter, I have concluded that some of them may be hybrids. Now, you know, human beings are all hybrids. Most of us, I would say. 50% of the planet is hybrid. We've got Anunnaki blood in our systems. We have Anunnaki genomes. But then there are others that look human, that are more than human. And those are the ones I call the hybrid hybrids. They're hybrids like us, but they are more hybrid than we are. Now, whether they have been purposely created to function as intermediaries between us and them, because when you run into some of them, it's a bit of a shock. You run into some that are humanoid but are not human. You know, you got little guys, and I'm not talking about the hybrid,
Grays?
androids.
I mean, when you say android, are we talking about the
You've
grays that
you've got little biological androids that apparently are clones. I mean, they just seem to make them like potato chips. And they're tremendously intellectual, that they have taken advanced intelligence and put the intelligence into that tiny little body. But then you have tall grays that are 5.5 feet, 6, which apparently are biological. I mean, they are evolved creatures from another planet, another life form. Then you've got creatures that I've run into that are enormous, 8, 9 feet, and they're white, not a hair on their body, and the joke is that they're almost like the Michelin Man. This character that they use to advertise Michelin tires, they're white and big, enormous, and
So the big guys that you referred to while you were on the craft being...
those are tall and thin. Now, I don't mean skinny, Walter. They're not skinny. They're trim.
Do they look human, or do they...
Well, they do, except when you look into their eyes. That's the thing that I tell people to be careful about.
Why?
You might think they're human, but if you look into their eyes, you will immediately know and immediately sense that this is more than human. And when you look into their eyes, they have a way of looking at you, Walter, that is very disconcerting, very uncomfortable, because they don't just look at you. They look through you. And the intensity of looking into their eyes, it hits you in a it's almost a gut reaction. There's an intuitive sense that you're dealing with something that's beyond human. And the emotions are very confusing, because you know immediately you're dealing with an intellect that is far beyond your own. And that's a humbling experience. Oh, is that humbling? When you're looking in the eyes of an intelligence that not only looks through you, but reads you like a book, that is very disconcerting. And it takes getting used to. But then after a time, I began to get used to it, and I found that they have a tremendous sense of humor, which I appreciated, because, you know, that you talk about intelligence that has a sense of humor. You're talking about an intelligence that is somewhat beyond our own. And I appreciate their sense of humor. And I've got to a point where they literally, and I told Carrie this one time, the last interview I gave her, and I thought that would be the end of him, because nobody's going to listen to me ever again. Walter, they picked me up one time, took me out of my bed, took me with them, and they kept me for 6 weeks. And one of the things that caused me to go through a very severe evaluation of my sanity is that they brought me back after having me there with them for 6 weeks, and brought me back about 15 minutes after they took me. Now, I knew that they could manipulate matter, and I knew that they could manipulate time, but I didn't think they had that capability. Where they took me to, and Carrie asked me, where were you? And I says, I had no idea. Whether I was on another planet, whether I was in another dimension, I could have been in another galaxy for that matter. All I know is the sun was warm, the water in the little creeks were fresh and clean, pure, the grass was green, and they had a menu of pictures. And they'd show me this little folder with pictures on it, and I could pick what I wanted to eat. And whatever I poked at, or what I told them, they brought me.
What did you eat?
Pork chops, steak, fried chicken, bacon and eggs. And yeah, I tell people that, and they say, oh, you're out of your fucking mind. And I says, well, I thought I was too. But then it dawned on me this was all real. Now I says, whether I was actually eating pork chops or not, I don't know. But it sure tasted like a pork chop, because I saw the picture and I says, I'll have that. And I lived well. I ate regularly, went to the bathroom. They had a little room for me, and I had all the accommodations you get in a 5-star hotel.
What did you do for 6 weeks?
Oh, ask them questions like crazy.
What did you learn?
Followed them around, looked around what I thought was their city. It was some kind of a grouping of buildings and offices and laboratories or something. There was no traffic. And there were streets and sidewalks and all, but there were no vehicles. The other thing I think I told Carrie, I never once ever saw any of them eat. They provided me all I needed to eat, whether I was made to think that I was eating pork chops or not, but I sure as hell ate the pork chops and enjoyed them. It could have been like on Star Trek where they, poke a little something in the machine and it makes it for you. I don't know that. But I followed them around and I asked questions incessantly. I just never stopped. And then I found out something that really shocked me. Walter, they were as interested in me as I was in them. And I didn't understand that. Because they kept asking me questions about how I felt, what I thought, how I felt about some of the things that I experienced in my life, like the wars. They wanted to know what my reactions were, what my responses were. And I'm trying to find out who the hell are these guys, There were male and female, and they're very definite. You tell the difference, A male is very masculine, and the female is very feminine. Just very much like us. But they're not like us. They're way the hell ahead of us. They are now where we might be in another 10,000 years. And that is a sobering thing to have to face. You see, I've learned the value of humility. When you confront them face to face, and you get to know a couple of them fairly well, and you look into their eyes, it makes you humble, because you know you're looking at an intelligence that's far beyond what you expected. They may look like us, but once you look into their eyes, you know they're not. I didn't see any children. I asked about that. I says, do you have young people, children? Oh, yes. I says, I don't see any. Well, they're busy. They're going to school. They're doing certain things. All I saw were the adults. I went into some of the buildings. I saw one of them was a library. They showed me one library that it looked like it was a computer, a giant computer. And I asked about it, and they said, well, you study history, do you not? And I said, yes, it's one of my favorite subjects. And they says, what is a period of time that you find interesting and exciting? And I says, well, I've always been curious about what really happened 300 BC with a young Macedonian by the name Alexander. And he went over and he said, sit down here. There was a chair, no arms on it, just kind of a seat in the back. And he says, watch that screen. And he poked some buttons and some dials. And there apparently it looked like something that was better than what the History Channel would put on. And it's Alexander the Great at a battle that he fought. And it's right in front of me. Widescreen. Sound, smell, all of it. I could smell the blood. Now, I know what blood smells like because I've been in combat in 2 wars. And he says, what do you think of that? And I says, oh my God, that's terrible. He said, yes, it is, isn't it? He says, anything else? I said, no, that's enough right now, thank you. I could hear the screaming and the carnage and the horror and the blood. It was all there. And then it dawned on me, and then I asked about it. He said, everything that has ever been still is. He says, what you've just seen is still happening. And I says, that heartbreak, that blood, that carnage, that butchery, yeah, it's all part of the record, he said. And in that series of experiences, I asked the question about karma. And I was told that there is indeed what we would look upon as an Akashic record. And that everything you have ever said, every act you have ever committed, every thought you have ever had, is all recorded in the Akasha, which is what karma is all about. And my old and dear friend from Galilee used to say it repeatedly. You reap what you sow. And that is that's a cosmic law, Walter. Karma is apparently a universal. And then the other thing that people ask me, what has it all meant to me? And I said, well, I've learned that I'm an immortal being. I've learned that I am infinite. That deep within me is a soul that is infinite, immortal. I learned that there is no death. But I learned that the most important thing, that for me at least, is God is. God exists. There is a God. And to be confronted with that reality is quite a sobering experience. Because I'd been an agnostic most of my life, you know, and I kind of had some interesting hints, some little ideas maybe that there was an old man on a big throne somewhere that was running the whole program, and that I never really believed it. Was never convinced. But when I've been over there and over the other side and been out of body a few times, I've learned that beyond a doubt. That human beings are living immersed in an ocean of consciousness. That everything is alive, including the planet, including space and time, And I haven't grasped that yet, because I can't grasp that space and time has conscious intelligence. But I've been confronted with that reality. Boy, what a change in a life that makes, you know?
Sure. All is conscious. I've heard that from our mutual acquaintance friend Ralph Ring.
Who?
Ralph Ring.
Oh, yeah.
So we've talked about that. He refers to the ship that he was on as being consciousness.
Well, the ships are, I'm sure, alive. I mean, the way they're put together, there's living creature there.
Mm-hmm.
There's intelligence there. I mean, they just don't put metal, plastic, and whatever together.
Mm-hmm.
Their ships are intelligent. Their ships are conscious. Some of the things that drove some of our engineers crazy was when they'd get inside of some of the little ones, couldn't find a propulsion system. They could find some little controls where you put your hands. 5 fingers. Some of these little dudes have 5 fingers or 6 fingers. So these little imprints on this control panel have 6 digits. So apparently they put their hands on there, and their minds and the ship becomes one. And so there isn't a propulsion system. Bob Lazar said that they found some of them did have something in the way of an engine, an engine, but it was not something that they could make any sense out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to take a look at the work of Otis T. Carr.
Oh, yes, I remember
Are
Otis. Yes.
Are you familiar with his work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the craft that was built in Hesperia, California. This is the one that Ralph had operated,
Mm-hmm.
and the same one apparently that the government had confiscated, and they disbanded that whole group.
Yeah.
Today in Australia, there's a group called a pod. It's a group of people who are building a prototype craft based on that design, and they're close to actually testing it here very soon. They want to be able to test it. There's also a group in California who have modified components of that design and are also close to testing a prototype of free energy, vortex energy from the ether. I've been following them since like last April.
Mm.
And the way Ralph describes it, he talks about teleportation. Basically, you don't fly it, you operate it. You get in, it's a conscious focus on destination, and you go there.
You and the ship become one.
I haven't really heard him express it in those terms, but to say that I've heard members of the pod describe it as the man completes the navigation system,
Mm-hmm.
and Ralph describes it as a teleportation. You think you're there, you move at the speed of thought.
They told me that when you travel in space, you travel in time.
Mm-hmm.
That space-time is a unity. You can't separate it.
Mm-hmm.
You travel in space, you travel in time. And people have asked me, do they have a time machine? And I said, hell, they've had time travel for 1 million years. Wanted to share one little thing with you that's
Sure.
fascinating. During the conference in '93 that Wendell and I put on in Phoenix here, one of our speakers, having a senior moment here. The one I told you that retired from Northrop Grumman.
I know you're talking
We all know.
about.
We all know.
We all know it.
We all have those moments, don't we?
This
Huh?
is not Ben Rich.
And I'm not
This-
Seaver.
We're not talking about Ben Rich. We're talking about.
David Froning.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was funny.
David Froning told me and Wendell back in '93.
Okay, hang
He
on,
was
I'll read it.
well. I was talking about David Froning and what he shared with us in '93 about hyperluminal flight and anti-gravity. Well, I lost track of David for a while because he was retired from Northrop Grumman and he was living outside of Flagstaff, just a mile or so from Lee and Britt Elders. Now, are you familiar with who the Elders are? Well, they were Wendell Stevens' good friends, and they worked on the Billy Meyer story for many years. Well, I lost track of David Froning, and I thought, well, he was older than I am. And I thought David was dead. Well, I subscribe to Atlantis Rising magazine. And I'm leafing through an issue back some months back, before I got sick. And so help me God, there's a photograph of David Froning receiving an award in astrophysics because he was an astrophysicist as well as an aerospace engineer. And so help me, there's a photograph of David Froning, and he looks younger than he did in '93. And where is he? He's in the middle of Australia. Now, being the kind of guy I am, peace, fits this. What the fuck is David Froning doing in Australia in 2011 when he should be dead? Because he's got to be 90. And he looks better in the photograph receiving his award in astrophysics. Well, knowing as I do what goes on in the middle of Australia, a place called Pine Gap, knowing that it's one of the largest national security agency facilities on the planet, it's also one of their major facilities on the planet, right smack in the middle of Australia in the same damn place. So I said, what the hell is David Froning doing in the middle of Australia? And I concluded that he's undoubtedly working with them. And we're working with them, and we've been working with them since '54. But that's a hell of another story, and I touch upon it in my presentation briefly. I quote von Braun, and I quote the other German scientist, the old rocket specialist. Name escapes me at the moment. The story is so overwhelming, Walter, so incredible, that disclosure ain't going to happen anytime soon, and on the fact that it is happening to some degree with subliminal education. But the masses out there, like the guy on the Men in Black, the movie, the average guy haven't a clue. Haven't a clue.
I just have a couple final questions.
Yeah.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Hmm?
What kind of a legacy do you want to leave behind?
Well, I've been asked that question before, and I find it's not that easy. How do I define myself? A lot of guys like me who went through 27 years of active duty in the military, they define themselves as the military. Retired colonels think of themselves as colonels. They carry the title to their death. I could carry the title Command Sergeant Major till I die. But I don't define myself as military. I don't even define myself as a graduate of the Emergency Management Institute. I don't think of myself as a emergency manager. And I've tried a few times to think, how do I define myself? And I think, I've become a bit of a mystic. I've become a hell of a mystic. You might define me by calling me a philosopher. That doesn't even begin to touch upon it. If I could define myself at all and think of myself as Yogananda tried to get all of us to think, when he tried to establish what he called the Self-Realization Institute, the Self-Realization Foundation, I define myself as an infinite traveler in time and space who've had an opportunity to spend a few short years on planet Earth. And if I've accomplished anything, you talk about legacy, I don't know that there's any such thing as a legacy that I could leave behind. But I've tried desperately to wake people up, to get them to stop to think of who they are, what they are, how incredible this life is, how incredible the universe is. Infinite, infinite, incredible, beautiful. So if I have a legacy at all, Walter, it's just that I've tried to wake people up a little bit.
And for my final questions, this is related to the East Eddy Ranch. I saw a short interview that you did, I think it was with Mel Fabregas.
Mm.
And I think it was during that interview you had talked about remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about, it's kind of a multi-part question, what is remote viewing? Is it something you do? Is it accurate? I know it's something you do. You've mentioned doing it. Is it accurate? And if you can tell about what you saw when you RV'd Mount Adams.
Mount Adams, yeah. It was a busy place, Mount Adams. Let me tell you a little background here. In 2003, I gave a presentation at the Bay Area Conference in San Jose. And I got up in front of the crowd and I said, look, this is my last presentation. I'm not going to do this anymore. I says, I've had it. I'm up to here. I'm fed up. I says, I'm tired. I'm worn out. I'm sick and tired of the infighting and the rock throwing and the mudslinging and all that. And that's just among the so-called community itself, you know. I've had it. I'm up to here. This bullshit just... So I said, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm out of here. We'll see you again one day. I went back to Phoenix and I became a recluse for 5 years. Literally, I went into seclusion. I'm retired. I'm retired 3 times, you know. I'm comfortable. I've traveled. I've been all over here, there, and everywhere. And for 5 years, I sat there and stewed in my own juices. But I got into some pretty heavy reflection, introspection, meditation. And then I got into some pretty heavy remote viewing, because I had been given advice from people like Joe McMonigal, who I admire and trust, Ingo Swann, who I respect and admire. And I found that I could do it. Now, according to what Joe McMonigal says, you know, I'm guilty of what they call in the military backloading. Now, you know that you're familiar with the military process of how they used to do it?
I've seen one presentation with the scroll. And
Okay. Well, you know, the 2 or 3 guys would do it, and they'd give you a little envelope with sealed, and wouldn't tell you anything other than they'd give you a coordinate or something and so on. Well, I don't do that. If I want to remote view a place or a location or a situation, I know damn well what I want to look at. And I've learned that it's possible. I know every human being on the planet can do it. It's not that difficult once you work out the process. You have the capability of going out and seeing reality at a distance. You not only see reality, you not only see locations, places, and such, but you see understanding. And that's something that's difficult to put into words. You feel things when you put your concept and your consciousness at a certain place or in a different time. And you want to know more about it, and you want to know what's happening there. And you're not just interested in describing the location and the railroad tracks and the road and all of that. You want more. You want an understanding of what's happening and what's taking place. So I'm guilty of what they call backloading. You know, I don't play by the rules.
What does that mean, to backload? What does that mean?
Picking my own target, as it were.
When I heard backload, the first thing I thought of is maybe some sort of pre-program or preconception
Mm.
of what you might be trying to look at. So in the case of Mount
Yeah,
Adams, that could be very easy because
That's part of it. That's a good term, yeah.
okay.
But when I was up there with James, he was so involved with Mount Adams and what had been going on up there. And he said that they come in and they literally fly right into the mountain. And of course I had known that they can do that, have done that for centuries. But I sat out there one afternoon all by myself. Hadn't had a bourbon, hadn't had a Jack Daniels, so I was not.
That would be front loading. See?
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So I looked at Mount Adams, and it was beautiful. It was a sunny, warm afternoon, and I'm sitting out there by myself and enjoying it, and I got myself in kind of an altered state, which I find that I have to do if I want to remote view anything. And I'm looking at that beautiful snow-capped mountain sitting right in front of me over there. And I put my consciousness inside the damn mountain, and I found out that there is all kinds of crap going on inside that mountain. And my first thought was, I'm looking at U.S. military operations of some kind. And then it dawned on me that I'm looking at, 2 or 3 life forms from somewhere else inside that mountain, and it's a pretty busy hive. And I can tell, James says they fly in and out of the damn thing all the time, and I can understand it. There's a pretty large facility there. Now, I didn't stay in that long enough to figure out what they're really doing there, except that they are there and they are doing something there. Now, Ingo remote viewed Pine Gap, and he says, the damn place is an R&R center. Yeah. And people say, a lot of people who weren't in the military, what the hell is R&R? Well, it's rest and relaxation. He says Pine Gap is their R&R center. And I've jokingly said in several conferences and presentations that any advanced intelligence that deals regularly, continually with human beings needs rest and relaxation. God, you need to get away and find some R&R sometime. Now, how they entertain themselves in that R&R center, I don't know, but I have been told by one of them that one of their favorite pastimes when they're aboard ship out there in orbit is they watch human television. They find us hilarious. And I do the same thing if I'm, what do they call it, surfing on the tube. Sometimes I'll hit something and I don't want to watch that, but I'll turn the volume off and watch. And one of the things I joke about is watching Dancing with the Stars. Now, if you turn on Dancing with the Stars and turn the volume off and watch on the screen what they're doing, it is hilarious. And I've been told by one of them that one of their favorite pastimes, of course it's one of the things that they do because they're supposed to, they're monitoring us continually, is that they watch human television and they think it's hilarious. They think we're funny. Well, it's like going to the zoo and watching a bunch of orangutans and baboons misbehaving. Pissing on each other, throwing dung at the humans who are standing at the fence.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but
Oh my! This group of clowns that we are, and our misbehaving and our foibles. You've got to have a sense of humor about this because we are hilarious. We are a bunch of damn baboons going about our business. Silly-ass business as it is.
Yeah.
But I've enjoyed this little time with you this afternoon.
So I appreciate you taking all this time to do that.
It's my pleasure.
So,
I've enjoyed this immensely because you sharing with me earlier, as you did, about your personal experiences means a great deal to me. And it made me make a point that I wanted you to realize that you're not alone. That you've opened a door into a new world that you haven't even seen.
No, I haven't, and I know that. I'm very anxious about the future and what's
Well,
going
if
on.
you're ready, if you've reached a point emotionally and spiritually.
I believe that I am. I'm thoroughly.
Well,
prepared
it
and ready
strikes
for
me
it.
that you are.
Yeah.
If you're ready, they'll give you more and more and more.
Mhm.
And they'll load you down, my boy.
Yeah. I'm like.
And they'll start laying things on you like they laid on me about their being able to manipulate matter and time.
Yeah.
Now, I'm still trying to come to terms with that.
Sure.
I spent 6 weeks with those guys.
Well, you know what I've heard. I've done a lot of reading. I've read a lot of books, and I've looked at a lot of videos, and just education. Who are the scientists? What are they saying? Theories about gravity and all this. I mean, Ralph has binders of stuff on science like this that I've just poured over, and have looked at all these various theories. But the bit about time, relationship between time and gravity. Out there, what kind of gravity is there? So they talk about when you enter this atmosphere here on this planet. That's where you have the linear time begin.
Yeah.
So you talk away. It's entirely possible you've gone away for 6 weeks.
You immerse yourself
15
in time
minutes here. Yes.
Yeah.
I believe
Out
it's
there,
entirely
there is no
possible.
such thing as time. Not as we understand it.
Sure.
I'm still coming to terms with that. But I can deal with it now. I mean, I'm not wondering whether I'm sane or insane or not anymore. I think I'm about as sane as anybody can be.
For me, I'm just driven to get close enough. I just want to see it for myself. You hear the stories, yours being one of them, right? Several of them, right? You go back to, way back when you read the book that they
He
wrote.
pulled it out of a file cabinet
Yeah.
and read the manuals.
Right. So here I am. I come along. He's reading this, but I'm like in diapers. He's reading this stuff, right? So.
What do you think I am?
Well, yeah, no doubt. But I want to see it. These are great. All right. Why is a lot of the why questions? Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? Who are we really? And that realization. People talk about realizing their mortality. Now after I've realized my mortality in the military, I've gotten out. Now I'm on this path, and I've realized my immortality.
Yeah.
And who we are. And
You're beginning to realize your infinity.
it's just the beginning.
Right.
Let me tell you a little amusing story, which I think is kind of amusing and yet heartbreaking. One of my dear friends is Whitley Strieber.
Okay.
He's got a new book out.
He wrote Communion, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I read his book.
His new book is him trying to deal with the reality of what happened in communion.
Communion scared the piss out of me.
It scared the piss out of Whitley.
I read that book. Holy
He wrote it
cow.
as a form of therapy.
Yeah, did he? Yeah.
But his new book that's out
yeah.
is literally an address to make sense of what he experienced in communion. And he's still confronting things that he cannot deal with. For example, in the first 2 chapters, there's an incident he talks about where he ran into an old friend with the aliens, a person he had known who had worked for the CIA. And this friend is with the aliens and working with them.
Where?
Whitley found out, not long after that he had died some months before.
What?
Yes. So Whitley is meeting this old friend and shaking hands and reminiscing because this old friend is working with the aliens, and he found out later that he had died 6 months before that. Now, Whitley is trying to deal with that.
Do you know Whitley? Do you know him personally?
I know Whitley.
Okay.
I've known him for years.
Okay.
He's a good friend.
Yeah.
Because he and I both went to the secret schools. Not together.
What secret schools? What are we talking about now?
Oh, my.
Do you know?
Um,
No.
Whitley went when he was young. Began to remember that he was taken out of his house at night many, many times. to a place outside of town where he was living at the time, was San Antonio. And he and a whole bunch of other children were being schooled by aliens.
So this is what you refer to as a secret school.
Secret school, that's what he referred to it.
So you mentioned it in plural. Are there multiple alien?
Oh, yeah.
secret
Well, you
schools?
see, I wasn't living in San Antonio. I was brought up and raised years before. I'm much older than Whitley. I went to secret schools when I was a child outside of the suburbs of Indianapolis, Indiana. And he was going to them outside of San Antonio, where the aliens had gotten a whole bunch of children together and in the middle of the night were schooling them. But then most of it was erased from their memory.
Right.
But it would sometimes flood back like spontaneous recall.
Right.
What's the point of that? You go to school and you erase it.
Right. Well, Jim Mann went through the very same thing, and he is the director of MUFON here in Phoenix.
You can't erase
No.
the subconscious.
Yeah, that's just strange.
If you have an experience and it makes an imprint, it's registered.
Sure.
Right.
Now, you consciously may not be able to recall it, but it's in there.
Got it.
And if you go through hypnotic regression, you can bring it out sometimes.
Well, the question of purpose is